Thanks, Professor Chen. And yes, everybody, you talk your opinions about BRI. And here, I have a question. The first for Rafik. According to ANBOUND's research, we proposed common market, especially in terms of economic benefits. Common market shall be a solution for Belt and Road initiative. But we also facing a lot of criticism from outside, just as Professor Chen said, ANBOUND is regarded as a critical think tank more than RAND. So, so we want to get your suggestions how to explain well to either China's policymakers and other think tanks in the world. Because we think whenever an internationalized industry transfer occurs, it would drive the rise and the fall of the regional economy, as well as adjustment, optimization, and upgrading of industry structure of the host country. In the history, we look back, the Britain and in 19th centuries and the first half of 20th centuries, they also shifted in industrialization to the outside world. And after the Second War, with the improvement of industrialization level, the traditional industries from the United States, such as steel and textile, were transferred to other countries. After that, in 1960s and 1970s, Japan and Germany also transferred labor-intensive processing industries to East Asia, Southeast Asia, and parts of Latin America. In terms of research perspectives, we think that's natural for China, or in our economic trajectories. We forward BRI, and China wants going outside and show its economic power. And also, we want to get all win with other countries, regions. But how to well communicate it with outside, especially US and European countries. What's your suggestions to China, Rafik?
Right, thank you. Currently, the world is linked for trade and investment only through the World Trade Organization in terms of mechanisms for fair trade, for low tariffs. And that covers the trade in goods, not even services, and doesn't cover investment. So the BRI, which connects up so many countries which are not otherwise linked with each other, to expect them to all agree on a common market between Europe, Central Asia, and China, for example, or between Pakistan, Central Asia, as another example, would be quite difficult, I think. The argument for common market in terms of rules and free access to goods and services has to start with a regional and maybe even a bilateral approach. So bilaterally, China and partner countries, maybe like Kazakhstan. Now, wherever there are regional organizations like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, one can try and use them. But by and large, these organizations do not exist where China is a full member. And so China needs to patiently work on bilateral and regional arrangements whereby the barriers to trade and investment are removed. And even achieving one common market within either Central Asia, or even with Pakistan, or even with North Africa, or East Sub-Saharan Africa would be a great success. And that would then show the way to make a difference to other countries which will say they want it. See, right now, from the partner countries' point of view, the attraction of the BRI is that China has an advantage in capital supply and know-how, and the partner country has the advantage of location and labor. So they can supply the location and they can supply the labor, and then China can supply the capital and the know-how. So there's a comparative advantage theory here being fulfilled. That is their advantage. That is why they want to do it. So they are not looking at it initially in terms of meeting global needs. They're looking at it more from the viewpoint of fulfilling their national needs for development.
Mhm.
So, for example, the Mombasa-Nairobi railroad, which Professor Chen mentioned, is seen within Kenya as an initiative to develop Kenya. From a Chinese point of view, it is seen as a larger initiative, as part of a larger initiative to connect up China more effectively with sub-Saharan Africa. So given the difference in perspective, and given that many of these partner countries are very poor countries, which are very worried about opening up their economies fully to competition, even from their neighbors, forget about from China, I think it's much better not to take such a global perspective as a common market, and instead strive for bilateral and regional alliances. And then when those succeed in one or two cases, then join them up and stitch together a global alliance from successful regional alliances. So that's what I would recommend.
Oh, thank you very much. And Jennifer, just you mentioned the approach for BRI is health Silk Road. I'm quite interested in this topic, and I have also a question for you. And as you have a testimony before of the Congress, you suggest collaboration between US and China, either from SARS and COVID-19. And so what's your suggestions and to China's policymakers, how we can behave well with other partner countries?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the latest time during the COVID-19, it was in March, then when Chinese President Xi Jinping was on a phone call with the Italian Prime Minister, that he bring up the health Silk Road. So the idea is that because Italy is one of the major partner for China in Europe on the BRI, supporting Italy's fight with COVID-19 was framed as a health assistant along the BRI. So after March phone call, we have seen that this health Silk Road, this name stayed in the last few months, basically become a feature of China's assistance program that's along the BRI countries. Usually these medical supply and medical know-how, these support are given to the countries through the embassies. And in some cases, the support was given through some of the companies along the BRI projects. So I think that the image is that right now for the BRI countries that China is hoping to help them with the medical know-how and the medical supplies. But I don't think this is really a new concept because back in 2017, again, President Xi went to WHO and signed the MOU with WHO in January 2017 that he also used the health BRI, health Silk Road. So that was to talk about build up the public health systems worldwide. along the BRI. So I don't think it's a really brand new concept, but it certainly has been drummed up during the COVID-19. And if I can talk about even longer history, China has a long history of providing a medical assistance to developing countries. It can be traced back to the late 60s and early 70s that when China sending out the Chinese medical team. So over the years, we have seen the five norms of these health assistants. It is about the Chinese medical team, the know-how, and it's also about infrastructure building. So building clinics, building hospitals, those has been done for a long time. And more recently, in the mid 2000s, there start to Chinese government and programs started to export medicine and some of the especially traditional Chinese medicine as a counter for anti-malaria in Africa. And then they also train foreign physicians, public health professionals. And in 2014 to 16, China sent out the largest humanitarian team to West Africa to actually working with US CDC to fight Ebola. So these are all the good, successful historical deeds that China has done. There were some criticisms in the past. It's mainly on what are the impact of these efforts. Compared to large donors, international donors, China traditionally not providing a lot of funding on global health, but rather support the global health through these five different ways. So traditionally, it's very different from the Western global health leaders or donors. But it has been seen as a complementary force, and but we also see that has been changed recently. The setup of Citica after the model of USAID, showing that China wants to separate the commercial. It used to be in the Ministry of Commerce, but now it's separate out these health assistant to the foreign aid agency. So I think that's a good action that's showing that China wants to regulate and systematic having a plan to lead or to work in the global health, which is it's improvement. So I think so far we have seen that in COVID-19, China has been sending out a lot of medical supplies, and the response is mixed. So I think China might be better off if they first set up a very consistent plan. What are their target? What is the comprehensive plan to coordinate different activities, and having a centralized quality control for these programs. Those probably will help China's image in the long run.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. And just now, Professor Chen give us quite interesting points according to his own research about BRI. And also, Professor Chen did a lot comparison between RAND and ANBOUND's BRI report. Thank you so much. I very appreciated your time and efforts. And so, Tony, what you have more learned from today's talk and from Rafik, Professor Chen, and Jennifer's introduction and their proposals?
Because we didn't really talk a lot of details, so I actually really have questions for two of our honorable guests. I think my first question is that based on my understanding, and I did read a lot of stuff in English about the BRI, and the most Western research on the BRI did not really, have a common ground. Like, what do you think about BRI? What it is, and everyone has its own explanation. There is no major, like a major argument in there. So my question is that true in the Western world? Because the general feeling of mine is that everybody is confused about this grand proposal. And that's my first question. My second question is to Dr. Jennifer. And you actually mentioned the so-called pandemic diplomacy, right? So you said the result of that is mixed. So I really want to hear more about that. So like because most stuff I read is kind of saying that this thing didn't really, it's not mixed. It's actually, didn't work actually. It actually blow back, fire back. And so I just want to hear more about that. So that's my two questions.
Okay, I'll respond to the first one.
Okay.
And the question is, what is the view in the Western world? I don't think the Western world has one view. I think the American view might be different from European countries or Japan, for example, which I'm including, but it's a developed country. If you look within the English-speaking media, which includes, India, Kenya, many countries which have adopted English as their language, even there you'll see a wide range of views. I think maybe led by the US ever since Obama decided not to join the BRI, there's been more of a focus on the security and strategic aspects of the BRI rather than the economic benefits.
Mm-hmm.
I think that led the United States to fail to realize the real benefit of the BRI, which is, as Professor Chen says, it's economically transformative for the countries that receive it. I think should be the starting point of understanding the BRI, not from what China gains out of it or the West will lose out of it. It's what the countries that will get the investment will gain from it. Because if they don't gain much, much more than they could by borrowing from the World Bank or waiting for some other countries to give the money, it's not going to pay off for them. So I'm not buying all these stories about corrupt governments receiving aid. I think these countries that are taking the money fully recognize that they have to pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing it to lure a lender into a debt trap. I don't buy the debt trap argument for a moment that it's bad for the borrower. It's actually bad for the lender. So I agree with you there. So, but the key point is that the country that receives the funding and the investment must benefit in a big way. And understanding that and how transformative that is in terms of new systems, new ways of operation, I think is key. As you know, the economics field institutions drive growth.
Yeah.
Most of the countries receiving the funding do not have good institutions. So to what extent will the BRI transform their institutions? I think that's where China ought to play a role, saying that, okay, our institutions may not be perfect, but we have certainly much, much better institutions for regulating, for managing, for operating these investments, and let's focus on that. The West will wake up, I think the West is very business oriented. Already Western companies like Siemens, General Electric, which is a Western American company, they have received big contracts under the BRI. They will continue to be participants.
So I just one follow up is that you mentioned institution, right? I totally agree with you, but I just want to add that the Chinese economic institution is not perfect, as you said. So I think they can both, learn during this process, right?
You mean the West and China?
I mean, what China and the BRI countries, they can, as you said, certainly China is better than the most underdeveloped country along the BRI, but China's institution is not, economic institution is not really as good as perfect. So I think they...
Yeah, but let me point out that actually we shouldn't take the Western model as being the gold standard necessarily. It is in some cases,
Yeah.
But you look at electricity regulation or telecom regulation, the whole structure of the Western model was built around monopolies, accepting high quality, gold plated monopolies which would deliver a limited range of services at very high cost, but of very good quality. And it took many decades of Silicon Valley and so many other developments to break that monopoly. I mean, I think the Western model was a really bad model to follow if you were reforming your sectors. I was deeply involved in reforming India's telecom sector and the financial sector. And I would fight with the policymakers in Delhi saying that you need more innovative ways of looking at it than the US model. So much so that one day the chief economic advisor of the Indian government, Ashok Desai, told me that I've come up with a new saying: for every bad approach and for every bad regulation, there is a successful country that has adopted it.
Mm-hmm.
So Singapore has bad models, US has bad models. We shouldn't be in a rush to accept bad models. We need to look at models that are adapted to the needs of the country.
Yeah.
And that might be competition in some cases, it might be resource driven, it might be human capital regulation. I mean, that's a very sensitive, important area to look at.
I understand Rafik said each country have their own limits and advantages. They shall adapt it which approach are benefit for their own other people and their economy, not just follow other models, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Jennifer, you respond
Yeah,
the
I would
second
just
question.
try to be quick on succinct on this. So my thought on the China's good gesture to other countries during the pandemic. As you said, there was lots of criticisms. It's mainly aimed at not that China's providing medical supply or consultation. It's more of whether China's trying to use this opportunity to gain politically or gain soft power, or even to the degree to cover up for the initial missteps in China. So I think I think it's still very important for China to have a consistent plan with global health. I think this pandemic shows that a lot of the threats we're facing is not just economic or even military or terrorism, but lots of this devastating crisis are coming from from the nature. So I see this pandemic as a manifestation of that we should have a better global system to fight against a pandemic, a virus. So similar to climate change, right? So these are the very prominent challenge to all countries. So I think China could take a lead in, or at least participate in build up the systems. Either it's WHO or there's might be other, the Gates Foundation set up the CEPI and the COVAX. All these organizations are trying to gather the goodwills from the world to help the countries that has the most to lose. So I think those systematic participation and will go for a longer way. So I think providing medical device at the time of shortage, I think it will certainly gain some goodwills. But I think for the long term, especially this pandemic will be around for a few years. It won't go away quickly. So I think this is a great opportunity for China to think about how to work with other countries to build a strong alliance.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. And today our time is nearly running out. So finally, I have a conclusion for today's conversation. And according to ANBOUND's policy engagement, we think BRI marked the turning point of China's foreign policy. It considered to adopt an outward-looking posture and actively using its resources to shape its external environment. China of the BR indicated the Beijing has been. So thank you everyone to join our conversation and policy dialogue. Look forward to our meeting with all of you next time. Thank you again. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you next time. Thank you.